Establishing connection to Science Night. Please stand by.
Welcome back to another edition of the Science Night podcast. My name is James, and with me, as always, is Steffi.
Hey.
And Jason.
Hello.
Tonight, we're talking about the psychedelic Bronze Age, a story of the West. We're going to revisit our favorite new segment where Dr. Diem clears up the fusion confusion. And in the second half, we're going to talk about sports in the climate era. We got so much to cover today, so why don't we just get into it? News that tells us more about what it means to be human are always going to rank high in this podcast. However, our first story shows us how the title doesn't really always do the story justice. You see, 3,000-year-old hairs hold the oldest clues about psychoactive drug use in Europe. Seems more like we're going to be telling a Bronze Age teen comedy than what the article actually tells us. So let's go a little bit deeper. Recently, a team found a cave on the island of Menorca off the east coast of Spain. In this cave was a chamber that was sealed since 800 BCE, containing human remains, some of which had their hair specially prepared and sealed in tubes made of antler and wood. And after testing these strands, they found that scopolamine and atropine, two compounds found in plants from the nightshade family with psychotropic effects, were in this hair, and they had to have been using these substances for at least a year fairly often. So it's not just contaminating the sample. This confirmed the long-held belief that humans were using psychoactive substances for a really long time, but also shed a little light on potential religious practices done by this group. So what do we think about these psychedelic Bronze Age folks? Just like riding the chill vibes in the Mediterranean.
I knew that the Grateful Dead was old. I didn't know they were this old.
Yeah,
and so
yeah. They had all these like teddy bears in the cave paintings, right?
Yeah, they were all dancing, right? Actually, when I read the story, I didn't think about the dead at all, which is shocking because it's usually the only thing I think about.
It is a story about dead people and psychoactive drugs.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And you want to know what came to mind immediately?
Thing.
What came to mind was this Brendan Fraser? Is this Encino Man?
Oh, man. Oh. Yes. Never mind. I'm back on.
Yeah. I mean, I guess what it all comes down to is this. These plants are available. Humans are smart. Humans get stressed out. I've never had the kind of stress that someone from the Bronze Age has experienced, right? Like if I, for example, break my leg, I'm probably not going to die.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And so to each his own, right? Yeah. I mean, whatever you need to do to get through the night, do it.
Right.
I'm just picturing them like, I'm very scared of everything out there. Like I might touch this plant and die or eat it and get sick or something like that. But they're out there experimenting because they're just figuring it out. That's
everything.
Amazing.
Every plant is edible once. The question is it edible more than once? Right.
Yeah.
And presumably, when Thag dies because Thag ate something that killed him, like Thag's descendants and relatives and friends aren't going to eat that thing.
That's right.
But when Thag finds something that's going to make his hair dance on end, everyone's going to eat that thing.
So here's the amount of pushback. I want to do a little bit of pushback about these substances maybe like chilling people out a little bit. The researchers did note other substances through this time period in different parts of the world that had like mild euphoric effects associated with them. They said that these two substances would make like scarier hallucinations, like maybe not as friendly. They're not associated with a good trip, I believe you would say. So I think that
That
maybe
sounds like
leads
me on
to
any prescribed drug.
yes, yeah.
That's
It
fair.
sounds
You know
it
what could
sounds
be
like
really
me when the upload deadline is coming up for this podcast, and I still have like 20 minutes of editing to do.
it could be really interesting if there was any evidence that this was used for any religious practice, right? I mean, that's something that wouldn't be out of question by any
Right.
stretch, right? I mean, there are
Mhm.
lots of cultures that use hallucinogens to help with vision quests and those sorts of things, right? And so it wouldn't be surprising to me if there was something in the culture, this Bronze Age culture, that um sort of pointed folks down that route.
Right.
but
That's
but we
that's
don't
like
have any
the
of that
downs.
evidence, it seems like, right? So
Yeah, it's the downside of the Bronze Age, right? Like we have evidence of things, but those cultures were not quite advanced enough, at least the ones that they're looking at here were not quite advanced enough to also have like some writing or things to go along with it. What they're kind of seeing in this particular instance that makes them think it may be religiously linked to the culture is that the bodies in which they found the compounds in their hair were specially prepared. They had like some dyes worked onto the hair, and like the hair wasn't on the corpse; it was on in these tubes. Um, so again, could just be normal funerary practices, and we're reading into it a little bit more. Could be that we have this evidence because the hair was prepared this way, but it was used by everybody. Or it could point to some kind of ritual practice. So, right, like you really want to say, like, oh, this is evidence of religion on the island of Minorca, but it doesn't really say that. You're right. It's saying the potential is there for a maybe after more investigation and further discovery. The Science Night way.
Science is always evolving.
Right. So let's move from the east coast of Spain to the western half of North America and talk about some horses. There are a million stories about the American West, but until recently, these stories were centered on the American settlers, usually of European descent, with indigenous groups lacking agency and a voice. But in our next article, we're focusing on the history of horses and their link to these indigenous communities. To start, it is commonly believed that horses originally evolved in the North American continent around 4 million years ago before moving into other parts of the world, but went extinct about 10,000 years ago. And to make it even more Eurocentric, it's also pretty widely believed that they went extinct because Native American groups overhunted them. But there's a lot of evidence showing that that's not necessarily the case, including this story. The most well-known story is told by the Spanish, placing indigenous horse use after the Pueblo Revolt of 1680 in present-day New Mexico. But oral traditions from some indigenous groups, specifically for this article, the Comanche, tell a story of the importance of horses well before the arrival of Europeans. And it looks like a new analysis of archaeological horse remains supports this tradition. Using isotopic analysis, radiocarbon dating, and DNA sequencing on horse bones from across the American West from museum collections. It now seems likely indigenous communities domesticated and used horses from the long believed extinct line of North American horses for way longer and without the need of escaped European horses. So we're actually talking to indigenous communities. We're listening to their story. We're looking at the scientific evidence, and it turns out Europeans are not nearly as important as we thought we were. It's almost like when you have diverse groups and diverse voices, the story becomes more accurate and richer. And I'm going to stop talking now.
yeah, this reflects a really, really cool trend especially in anthropology these days, but it's true in most of the social sciences. And I would hope that it's true in most sciences altogether, but certainly on the social sciences end. And that is involving the indigenous communities that one is studying in the research. Right? This was exciting because this was a partnership between an archaeozoologist, so someone who studies animal bones from archaeological sites, and a Lakota a member of the Lakota tribe who is also an expert in, I believe, oral traditions, and so combining the two very disparate lines of evidence and lines of inquiry to come to a much more powerful understanding of reality is really cool. I've served on several National Science Foundation grant panels over the last few years where this is a big topic of discussion because National Science Foundation requires proposals to all have a broader impact for society involved in it. And when it comes to anthropology, one of the best ways to have a broader impact on the community is to involve the community that you're studying in the research and then have them have ownership of those results because it's about them.
Yeah.
Proposals that do that well do much better in the review process because it's not just about the bottom line science. It's about how is the science going to make society better. Mm-hmm. This is a really good example of the kinds of things that excite the National Science Foundation now and that really make science exciting as we move forward, involving locals in the work about their local areas is really powerful.
Well, in understanding their expertise and also paying them for this too.
Absolutely.
I mean, that is experience, that is knowledge.
Mm-hmm. And you know, we've covered stories like this in past episodes. And I just wonder, like, what is the future of archaeology in North America going to look like now that we're actually listening to these indigenous voices and these indigenous stories? Because we've pushed back the kind of arrival of humans on North America so far. You know, we talked about the footprints in New Mexico, pushing that timeline back further. That coincides with stories that these communities have been saying for generations that we were like, no, that's not possible. Why are we talking about that? So it's refreshing and it's exciting all at the same time. I was going to do a bad soda joke, but I don't got one.
I was thinking
soda joke.
I was thinking so fresh and so clean.
Exciting. Oh, there we go. That's better.
Yeah.
Well,
that's not soda, right? Isn't that like toothpaste?
I think it was a hip hop song.
Oh, you know it's real sad? Watching commercials for grocery stores and they have hip hop like music in them, and you're like, I'm old.
It's gone so mainstream that they can do like a Kroger ad now.
That's right. I think when you have hip hop music in a Kroger commercial, it's no longer called hip hop. It should be called Ship Shop.
You know, I know the timeline flipped when they started using Dee Snider's music for national commercial campaigns.
Speaking of
the
Dee
guy
Snider,
who was like in front of Congress.
Right. So speaking of Dee Snider, right, and Twisted Sister and his testimony in front of the Congress in the 80s about censorship, which was really interesting, right? And he shockingly, he still subscribes to exactly the same approach to the use of his music, right? And that is like, nothing about me without me here. Don't use my stuff. And I'm very committed to getting my message out. Did you see what he said this week?
No, what did he do?
He said something along the lines of, no one can use our music without permission. However, Twisted Sister music might be used at political rallies, right? And then he came out immediately and said, but we have no plans for that at this point. It just could be.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It could be a rel.
Right. I was like, okay.
Man. We really fused this story to a Twisted Sister.
We did.
Rant.
We did.
So speaking of
It's not a rant. Yeah. Speaking of twisted things.
Hold on.
Fusing twisted things together.
We really fused the story of indigenous horse lore and a Dee Snider Twitter. Oh man, I'm done. It's over. Hey, Steffi, talk about fusion.
Dr. Diem clears up the fusion confusion.
AD. Also, news from my lab in the basement. Okay. So
That's not frightening.
I'm gonna
that's
do
where we
tales
keep our
from the
tokamak.
I'll do
Everyone has a
Tales from the
tokamak in their
Crypt music, yeah.
basement,
It's where I keep my
right?
tokamak. I know. I get it.
I know.
I think you
Yeah.
call tokamak something differently.
So back to my tokamak. Okay. So my experiment is called Pegasus 3. We've talked about it before. We can probably link to a couple episodes. But I'm here to talk about how excited I am because we're going to start running again. We were funded to basically build a whole new lab to study innovative ways to start up future fusion power plants. We have been building this experiment for 3 years during a pandemic. And I'm going to call this is an artisanal bespoke experiment. Okay. There are like 80,000 parts. Okay. A lot of those are like custom made screws, but a lot of it's like custom made manufactured metal magnets, everything. So you have to hand fit a lot of this. Okay. So you can imagine how much you have to do and how intense this is. So one of our major things that we were doing was constructing this high magnetic field electromagnet. Has to have a lot of current going through it, which means it essentially wants to rip itself apart when we run. So we had to really build this robust structure to kind of keep it in place. So we finally built all that. We built all new power supplies to drive those magnets. And we turned it on Tuesday. And it works. And I'm
Oh, yeah.
so excited.
Love it.
Nice.
So now that we know the magnets work, we're installing the rest of the systems. So we'll have plasma soon, very soon. But
see, whenever I get something to work and then I start adding to it, it is inevitable that it will no longer work. Do you worry about that?
Oh, no, don't say that. Yeah, I don't sleep at night. No. No, so getting this magnet to run was the biggest technical hurdle that we had, to be honest. So going into it, because I mentioned there's so many stresses and strains, we tested a lot. We tested the power supplies individually. We tested a lot of the other subsystems independently. So the fact that we plugged everything together, because that's usually when you're like, oh, we got to shake out a bunch of problems.
Mm-hmm.
We had to shake out some things for like a couple days. And then when we turned it on and it just like worked, like that was amazing.
Yet, meanwhile, on the other side of the earth, literally everything that was metal smacked against the ground, right? And you're like, yeah, it's working. Yeah. It's working.
No. So before we turn on our magnets, you bring up a good point. Before we turn on our magnets, we had several crews of people on our hands and knees looking for any bit of metal that could be magnetized, because if it's near that machine and we turn on our magnets, it gets sucked in. I mean, you've probably heard those stories about like MRI machines.
Yeah, right.
Like,
I'm always terrified.
Right? Don't bring any metal because there are horror stories of like stuff getting thrown into. So we have to worry about that. In addition, essentially our experiment looks like a stainless steel vessel, and we do have some windows on it so you can like look into it. And we have an ultra high vacuum environment, so there's no air in it. It's actually less air than outer space in our experiment. So clean. There have been horror stories of people like leaving a wrench in their lab and the electromagnets get turned on and it smashes through the window, which is super bad because we have really sensitive vacuum pumps in there that if they get metal in them, they trash the pumps. And then those are really expensive and you have to replace those. So yeah. And the other thing is, because it's like high magnetic fields, we have our own power supply in the lab. Everything is locked out. So we run an audio alarm to clear everyone out of the lab. And then the doors are all magnetically sealed when we run. So yeah, there's a lot of safety that goes into that. And all of our team is trained in not only in first aid, AD, CPR, safety training for entering confined spaces where there's, air limitations and stuff like that. So.
But did you have to take lab safety? I'm just kidding.
Did you have to take did you have to take
Lockout,
like
tag out training, high voltage power supply training,
Yeah.
a lot training.
Can you please list your
All my training credentials.
I feel like we're IRB right here. Let's go through the training. Is everything up to date?
Oh, laser safety training.
Ooh, lasers.
Because we use lasers in our lab too.
I had to do that once
a lot
too.
of stuff. When are you guys going to come see the tokamak?
That sounded like an actual invitation. That sounded like an actual, not a, whatever, you can come. That sounded like a when are you coming?
Yeah, when are you coming?
I'm going to be way too in my head about metal on me. I wear glasses. I could ruin the entire experiment with like one Warby Parker frame flying across the.
I told you can't be in the room.
Right.
I know.
You're not getting anywhere close to it.
I also said, and I think maybe we can play back the footage where I said that's lame and what's the point?
Oh my gosh, that's right.
I do remember that, actually. I do.
This is an open invitation to anyone listening to this podcast. If you can find me and email me and you want to come to Madison, Wisconsin, you can get a tour of my experiment.
Man, if this doesn't become the most downloaded, you gotta also bring this podcast with you. That's your admission.
Right.
If this doesn't become the most downloaded episode, people just don't care about fusion.
The price of admission is just one Science Night sticker. Return.
Yeah.
Or a t-shirt. Anything from our merch store will get you in.
I guess I'm gonna need to get some stuff from our merch store, huh?
Oh man.
Yeah, where can I find that, James?
Oh, you can find that at cyanite.com/merch. And we got some new stuff coming out. I got some summer vibe stuff getting drawn up right now. I've been at the t-shirt design studio getting things right. So keep that on the lookout in the next couple months.
Awesome.
The vibes are high and sciencey, I guess.
Yeah.
You're steering the ship, Steffi. You can send us to Adland whenever you want.
Adland, speaking of Adland, has anyone seen my commercial on the Big Ten Network?
Oh, I have.
Big Ten Impacts?
I have.
Yes. Speaking of other commercials, here's a message from a podcast James thinks you will enjoy.
Hi, everyone. This is JJ, the co-founder of Good Pods. If you haven't heard of it yet, Good Pods is like Goodreads or Instagram, but for podcasts. It's new, it's social, it's different, and it's growing really fast. There are more than 2 million podcasts, and we know that it is impossible to figure out what to listen to. On Good Pods, you follow your friends and podcasters to see what they like. That is the #1 way to discover new shows and episodes. You can find Good Pods on the web or download the app. Happy listening.
If you've listened to this podcast, you know that 2/3 of us are long-suffering fans of America's pastime. And by that, we mean baseball, not standing idly by as the world burns around us. There's something about the roar of the crowd, the crack of the bat, and the Phillies and Royals blowing yet another late inning game. Baseball seems like this unchanging monolith with records going back well over a century at this point, but of course the game has changed a lot, moving from the dead ball era to the steroid era and beyond. The game played today is pretty unrecognizable to the days of Chuck Klein, Grover Cleveland Alexander, Richie Ashburn, Robin Roberts. I'm sure there were famous Royals too. And a new article from a team at Dartmouth College, originally published in the Journal of American Meteorological Society, but really it's kind of been picked up everywhere at this point, talks about how warmer air created by climate change has created about 500 more home runs since 2010, with a lot of math and statistics that I do not understand to back it up. With that trend expected to increase as the climate crisis worsens. So what do we think about hitting dingers as the world burns? And honestly, we can just talk about sports in the climate era, which is going to be the title for this episode. Don't you just love it when they say the title of the thing that you're listening to or watching?
I do. I certainly do. I also love it when you bag on the Royals at every opportunity.
I honestly couldn't think of a famous Royal from the past. My knowledge of the Royals begins at 1980.
Right. Well,
I know
the
nothing
Royals
about baseball.
began in 1967, so there wasn't that much before that.
And Steffi, don't worry, we got something in here for you too.
Good. Good.
Prior to that, though, it was the
Better.
Kansas City Athletics. Prior to that, it was the Philadelphia Athletics. So that
Oh,
we do have
wait, what
something
was
in
that,
common.
huh?
That's right. I'm saying, well, neither one of us could hold on to that team.
That's true.
That's all I'm saying.
What about the Brewers? We have a sausage race.
You do. You do. And that's all that needs to be said.
Yep.
Yep. Actually, the Brewers, the Brew Crew had the best in the 70s, had the best nickname for the team, Harvey and the Wallbangers. I don't remember who was Harvey, and I don't remember who were the Wallbangers, except that
But
was just a cool name for the.
catchy enough.
I'll
Yeah.
tell you what
There
the
you go.
Brewers do exceedingly well, other than sausage-based athletics, is their logo is fantastic.
Right?
I am a sucker for like use of space to
It's
do
genius.
two things, but when you realize that catcher's mitt is an M and a B,
Yeah.
change your life.
Change your life. That's
And
right.
you probably, if like you didn't see it before and we just said something and you're like,
Yeah.
then you'll look at the logo and you'll be like, how did I miss that? Because it's so obvious once it's pointed out to you.
Right.
So actually, that's a really good segue into some obvious things that are wrong with this story. And that is, everything is being made about changes in air pressure and the ability for a ball to get more lift with changes in the climate. And that may all be true.
Oh my gosh.
But
yeah.
I don't believe that's the reason there are more home runs in baseball since 2010. I don't believe it has anything to do with climate change. It's not to say that climate change won't exacerbate the problem, but baseball itself has fundamentally changed over the last 20 years and the way that the game is approached. And that is not accounted for in this article at all. And as a baseball purist, it makes me very upset. That said, it makes me so upset that I don't even really care that much. Baseball's ruined anyway, since baseball destroyed itself this year by getting rid of the things that made the National League the superior league. And I say this as a fan of the American League, right? My team is an American League team, and that brand of baseball is inferior to National League baseball prior to 2023. Now, all of the game is crap.
There's so much going on in what you just said. Also,
unpack it for us.
I don't understand most of it, but I do want to highlight climate change is impacting everything. And that is just scary.
Yeah.
Just going to say that.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes, it's impacting baseball too.
And Jason, I got
explain some of those ranty things that you just said.
All right,
about how baseball got ruined and whatever. Because I don't know, I don't follow it.
I gotta tell you, I love a good piece of hitting as much as you do. Like taking what the pitcher's giving you and legging out a double, doing like a hit and run or a suicide squeeze. But
yeah, the suicide squeeze, the most exciting play in baseball, totally irrelevant now.
Well, I don't know. The
I don't know
bags
what
are
that
bigger.
means.
Steals
what is
are
that
up.
Thing?
So go
I'll
ahead.
Explain.
Baseball
I'll explain.
com.
Yeah. So here we go. A suicide squeeze is a bunt with a runner on third base who is running for home plate as the ball is pitched. Right. It's essentially a way to either steal home.
Yeah.
Or put the ball in play just enough to get the catcher away from home plate so that the runner can score. Right. It is.
I understand that.
The problem is this. What makes it the most exciting play in baseball is that if the batter does not make contact with that ball and the runner on third base is running toward home, right? It's going to be a play at the plate, right? And a pitcher pitches a ball, 80 to 90 to 100 miles an hour, and a runner doesn't run that fast, right? And so
that's a lot.
And so if that batter does not put the bat on the ball, that is going to be almost a sure out at home plate. But if they do put the bat on the ball, right, a run can score, and it's really exciting because everyone's hair is on fire when that's going on, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't matter anymore. So baseball did several things to ruin baseball this year. What they did was there's no longer a difference in the way that the lineups are structured in the American League versus the National League. So prior to this year, the American League had adopted in the 70s the designated hitter, which means the pitcher doesn't bat. There's an automatic spot in the lineup for someone who just takes at bats and doesn't play in the field. And the pitcher doesn't have to face a pitcher ever, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in the National League until this year, pitchers batted.
Until last year.
And
the DH
all
was
right.
in the National League last year.
Was it?
Yes.
Oh, see, I didn't even pay attention because
See.
it sucks. Like
Oh.
baseball has been ruined.
Oh no.
And that's because there's so much strategy that goes into whether or not you pull your pitcher out when they're scheduled to bat in the next half of the inning, right? So if your pitcher is dealing, right? Your pitcher is throwing nothing but aces, right? And like no one's getting a hit. But you need a run. Do you pull your pitcher when the pitcher's scheduled to bat in the next inning? Or do you keep the pitcher in there knowing it's most likely going to be an out because pitchers just can't hit the ball, right? They don't spend their time hitting the ball. They spend their time practicing throwing the ball, right?
Yeah.
So what do you do? And that's been taken away now. The other thing that's been taken away is that a pitcher who throws high and tight to a batter, pushes him off the plate, never has to stand on the other side of that, right? So a pitcher who decides to brush a batter off the plate, right? You're too close to the plate. I want you to scoot back, right? You're getting too much of the plate with your bat, and that's not going to be good. I'm going to push you back. That pitcher doesn't have to stand there and take a 95-mile-per-hour fastball to push them off the plate. So they can do whatever they want. There's no repercussions for moving, batters off the plate. That's just one of the problems. Then they made the bases bigger.
How much bigger?
Yes, right. It's ridiculous, right? They made the bases bigger.
How much bigger did they make them?
Just a couple of inches, I think, but enough that it will affect stolen bases, right? Like these bang bang plays.
I need to know how much percent bigger, like 10 to 20%. So I'm sorry you all are listening to this and not watching the video, because it is amazing watching James react to Jason's
I get the
investigative report
what do you
the
feel
history
about
of
kids on your
modern
lawn?
day baseball.
I love kids on my lawn. I'm fine with that. I'm fine with it, especially if they're picking
What about
up
if they played baseball on your lawn?
That's fine. Come learn the real game of baseball, and we'll talk about it, right?
Oh no.
Gotta use an oak bat.
Okay, so what I'm hearing
might just be I'm a little salty because the Royals have started the season 3-9, and I'm not real happy about that.
I was gonna say counterpoint to everything you just said.
So I'm hearing we need a follow-up study that's proposing an interdisciplinary approach to understand the impacts baseball has had, or climate change rules.
I got the follow-up
apparently
study.
Are bigger.
Yeah, I got the follow-up study, right? It's already been completed, and it's titled Changes in Baseball and How It Brought More Joy to James in 2022. Because in May of last year, Bryce Harper, my hero, tore his medial collateral ligament, which fans of baseball would know as that's the thing that makes you need Tommy John surgery. But since he's a fielder,
so sorry, medial collateral ligament of the elbow. I think that's important.
Of the elbow, sorry, yes. He tore his ulnar collateral ligament. Put that in. Oh man, AAA would be right down my throat.
Okay, you want me to talk a little bit about the
hold one second.
One second.
Because the NL had the DH, he was able to still bat because he didn't have to throw, and the Phillies went to the World Series. And I was such a happy boy for such a long time. So changes are good, Jason.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, James, and I'll just counter that with, what does it feel like to know that your team lost the World Series and the Super Bowl this year?
I don't know what you're talking about. I checked out. When they got in, I just turned the TV off. I walked away.
So sad for you.
It was like the end of Breakfast Club.
I get it.
Hand up.
I get it. Yeah. You and Judd.
Yeah,
Nelson,
let's Steffi talk about actual science now.
Well, right. So actually, to your point, Steffi, I've been ranting about how baseball's been ruined, but the bigger issue here is that, and so that my point was that it doesn't really matter that climate change is going to be affecting baseball because the game is dead. But
Just love that line.
That's the tagline.
That said, there is going to be an effect of climate change. I think that's clear. right? I just don't think that the effect that we're seeing, an increase in home runs, is because of climate change. But why don't you tell us how climate change might affect how far a ball can sail off of a
Okay.
bat? And then let's talk
Okay.
about why I don't believe that's true.
Okay. Fine. I love this.
Sorry.
I love that
believe,
intro.
I don't believe that it accurately reflects why there are more home runs in baseball. Let's put it that way.
The first way you said that, it was like, I don't believe in science.
Right. I
Please,
definitely.
please talk about this thing that you want to talk about, and also I hate you.
I'm going to talk about turbulence. Okay. This is turbulence is just fluid motion around the ball. Okay. It's characterized by chaotic changes in pressure and flow velocity of the air around the ball. And so if you're having things change about the air, it's getting denser, it's getting warmer, that can change the flow of air around the ball. And really, these balls are going at very, very high speeds. So you're going to have that turbulent airflow regime around it. And because of that, you create a small wake behind the ball, and it reduces the drag in the ball. So it can go faster or, depending on the air conditions, or slower compared to what you're normally used to. So you've seen this in, like, soccer balls have a rougher surface, and that actually leads to more predictable flight that affects the speed at which you get this, flow around the ball. But softballs or these baseballs are a little bit smoother, so maybe it's not as predictable. So that can actually impact the way these balls are traversing through the air.
That's
both
great.
when you're pitching and then hitting them.
And it makes a lot of sense, right? Reducing the drag on the baseball will allow it to travel further. But none of this discussion is reducing the fact that baseball is a drag. And it's because of the way that it's played now, right? So beginning in the early 2000s with Billy Beane and his ascension to the general manager position at the Oakland Athletics, which is, again, back to the Athletics. It all comes back to Philadelphia and Kansas City, having been former homes of the Athletics at one point in their history. The way that baseball is approached now is very different. It all has to do with advanced statistics. And teams aren't constructed the way that they used to be constructed. The mantra used to be, get them on, get them over, get him in. And that was the idea, that you get a runner on base in an inning, you advance that runner, even if you're sacrificing outs to get that runner into scoring position. And the whole goal was to get a run across the plate in an inning. That's what it was. If you got more than one run across in an inning, they called that a crooked number, right? Meaning that it wasn't a straight one, right? It was crooked. It was some other number, and that's good. Crooked numbers are good because crooked numbers are harder to get than a single run, right?
Yeah.
That's not how baseball is played anymore. Baseball is now played by walking and by hitting the long ball. It's not by getting a base hit and then getting that runner over by sacrificing outs to get that runner over. It's about getting on, not swinging the bat, or if you do swing the bat, you're swinging for the fences. That is why there are more home runs in baseball. It has nothing to do with climate change. Now, that said, maybe using climate change as an important underlying factor, we could see a difference in the number of home runs moving forward. But to explain the number of differences between now and between pre-2010 is not an accurate representation of the data, in my opinion. All of that is to say, I love baseball and I hate it so much right now.
So let's look at what this story does well, and then we can wrap up with some other stuff. But this story, like I said, is everywhere. Like, it's on every sports thing. It is all over the place. And it's getting people who usually only hear about sports statistics, stories, news, and events to hear about how climate change is affecting the thing that they really love. And maybe that moves the needle in some climate action. I feel like that's something you can get behind, right, Jason?
Yeah, it's true. Climate change hit me in the baseballs. I get it.
Right. But this is the most recent story, but it's not. I just put in climate sports and all kinds of stuff came up.
There's so much.
Yeah, including FIFA. Everyone loves FIFA, and there's definitely no dark side to it at all.
Right?
None at all.
there's a great article on the conversation that I will link to because we do not have enough time to cover it in depth. But it was basically talking about how soccer is being impacted by climate change because it is played in very warm parts of the world. And those parts are going to be able to not like be suitable for athletic events, at least not at the times of the year that they're currently played. But then they doubled that up by like global FIFA, and the way they approach their business is driving climate change so much because of all of the new constructions that they are requiring for World Cup events. So it's like this feedback loop of the things that they are doing are making the game that they are promoting less able to be played in the future. So that's fun. But here's where Steffi is going to shine. I also found an article about how a white tent in the British countryside is just getting too dang hot. And, you know, bottoms are getting soggy in the Great British Bake Off. You know, chocolate showpieces are melting.
Yeah.
What do you
I'm
think
just
about
really
this?
worried. I'm really worried about the future of the GBBO.
How does this affect your league? Are you going to be thinking about like what the forecast for that filming season is when you're doing your picks?
Yeah. So before, I've never actually included any climate considerations into my picks. But now going forward, you go into the first episode, you got to see who's talking about the temperature in the tent. Who's actually conscientious about getting their bakes in cold in their fridge faster so it actually can hold up when they're carrying it to the table to be judged. I mean,
who's got their head on a swivel?
Right. Those custards aren't going to set up.
No, you hate to see it.
Those chocolate, like you said, the chocolate showpieces, they're not gonna stand up to. They've had hanging bakes before. Like, is this the end of hanging bakes? I don't know.
I'm just glad we're talking
What is a
about
hanging bake? I'm sorry. What is a hanging bake?
They had a couple where you actually had to like suspend it. Like, yeah.
That's right. Cut down the jargon, Dr. Diem. Come on.
I mean, are they going to change
about the Great British Bake Off?
The technical bakes now? They're going to limit their scope? They're not going to move out of the tent. They better not move out of the tent. If they move out of the tent, GBBO is dead to me.
There's not going to be lambs in the background anymore.
Right?
You know what they need to do is they just need to make it like the big tent for the Cirque du Soleil where it's air conditioned.
No, because I kind of like it when you watch the bakers and they take into account the humidity and how that impacts their recipe and their baking time. Like, I find that fascinating.
Okay. All right.
You can actually do that chemistry on the fly. That's impressive.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. All right. I stand corrected.
Well,
not about baseball though.
It's really getting hot in here.
No.
And we've had some really good and important conversations in this episode. But I think the fact that we are talking about hanging bakes and soggy bottoms in Britain means that you've made it to the end of another episode. But don't worry, we've got more coming your way. So be sure to follow us on social media. My name is James, and you can follow me on Twitter at James_Reed3. And you can see me talking about how great the DH is. And I love these new base paths. Jason, where can everybody find you?
Ooh, you can find me on Twitter at OregonJM.
And Steffi, where can everybody find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Steffi Diem or Instagram at Starshippin'.
You can follow the show at scicomm pod and visit our home on the web, cyanite.com, for past episodes, links to the stories we talk about and the people we talk to, and maybe like a supercut of Jason talking about how dingers are bad. And of course, our merch. There's a lot to see. You can see it all at cyanite.com. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. But until then, go Phillies.